The election eve in Georgia in the runoff race between Senator Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger, Herschel Walker. And nearly 2 million Georgians have already voted. The massive turnout already breaking multiple single-day records. The early vote total is expected to continue to rise as absentee ballots come in. Let's bring in NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki over at the big board. Steve, what can you tell us as we are counting down to the runoff?
Yeah, it's not quite as dramatic as it was 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, when control of the Senate came down to Georgia. It is 50-49 coming into this final unresolved race. Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock. For the Democrats, it's a chance to get to 51, and potentially, if you want to think long term here from the Democrat standpoint, they're looking at a tough Senate map potentially in 2024. So all the pad they can get, any pad they can get in terms of their margin here could be significant for 2024. So it does come down to Georgia. I think the most notable aspect of the preliminary in Georgia was that there was a split here. There was sort of a disconnect between Walker. You see on the Senate side here, neither candidate, Warnock or Walker, hit 50. That's why we do have this runoff. The Libertarian got just over 2% of the vote. Walker, you see, got 48.5% of the vote. Look at the governor's race. The Republican candidate, Brian Kemp, basically did 5 points better than Herschel Walker. A very comfortable victory for Kemp over Stacey Abrams in the governor's race. And yet there was a significant number of voters here who were comfortable voting Republican in the governor's race, who were not comfortable doing so in the Senate race. Some of them, you can see, voted for the Libertarian here. That Libertarian candidate in the Senate race got 3 times the support of the Libertarian candidate in the governor's race. Some of them perhaps left the Senate ballot blank, and some of them perhaps voted for Raphael Warnock. So I think one of the key questions heading into this tomorrow is those voters who voted for Kemp but didn't vote for Walker, do they stay home? Do they turn out? If they turn out, are they with Walker this time? Or do they go with Warnock? I think if you're Walker's campaign, one number really jumped out in the exit polls here. First of all, there's among independents here. You can see Walker won among independents, Kemp won among independents. But I think one number that really jumped out in the exit poll was this, specific to the issue here of good judgment. They asked this in the Senate exit poll back in November. Does Raphael Warnock show good judgment? And overall voters, 50 to 47% said yes, he does. Asked the same question about Herschel Walker, and there's the biggest difference we saw in the exit poll. Basically, almost a 2-to-1 margin saying no. Very high number of independents and even a not insignificant number of Republicans saying they question Walker's judgment. So there's a lot of talk here. What was it that caused that disconnect where Walker underperformed Kemp in the governor's race there? Was it the attachment to Donald Trump? Is that part of it? And is it this question of judgment and just sort of all of the sort of, personal drama that sort of attended the Walker campaign? So that sort of sets the stage for tomorrow. And again, here's how it looked in the preliminary. All Warnock really needed, you see, he landed at 49, almost 49.5% of the vote. Warnock really came about 25,000 more votes away from winning this thing outright on election night. If he could have gotten about 25,000 more votes, he would have won outright. There wouldn't even be a runoff here. So a couple things we'll be looking for. Here's one county you'll be hearing me say a lot tomorrow night. This is the biggest Republican vote-producing county in Georgia. Wow. This is one of the biggest Republican vote-producing counties in the country. Cherokee County, you're getting into the far northern suburbs, exurbs of Atlanta here. And you can see, look, it's big Republican territory. Walker won this thing by almost 40 points. But look at the gap here. Walker gets 67.6. Go to the governor's race. Kemp got 74.2. That's the kind of number in Cherokee County that wins a race for a Republican in Georgia. And that's the kind of number that's not enough. Yeah. So this is one of those places we're going to be looking. You get a lot of those voters I'm describing voted for Kemp, didn't vote for Walker. This is one of the places we'll be looking to see how they go tomorrow.
Steve, can you bring it back to that 63% number? And Jonathan Lemire, you can take the follow, but John Heilman, I'm just curious. This is what we were talking to the Rev about, especially the African-American vote in Georgia, and whether or not, after all they've seen with Herschel Walker, leave Trump aside, just especially with Warnock's real aggressive ad campaign, letting Herschel Walker speak for himself, the sense that it's a very condescending choice for Republican nominee for Senate, and that there may be some some voters that just can't find them, that just can't do it,
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly the case that the contours of this race shifted a lot when Democrats secured the United States Senate, and the race in some sense had less stakes attached to it. And so how, for both sides, but particularly for Raphael Warnock's side, raising the stakes in the election in order to try to get the kind of turnout they needed to be able to win has been one of their main goals. It would have been easy in some sense for them if the fate of the Senate, control of the Senate, was on the line. Now it wasn't on the line, so they had to kind of shift strategy.
Looking at them, listening to them,
and try to focus. Yes, and try to focus. I'm curious, Steve, whether you think, on the basis of what we know about the composition of the electorate. Obviously, it was a presidential year, but the composition of the electorate in 2020 during the presidential election, the normal election in November, then the composition of the electorate to the extent it changed in the runoff, and how that's mirroring what we're seeing in this. We obviously don't know yet for the runoff here, but what are you seeing in terms of what difference there might be in terms of who's showing up to vote in this election, how much that matters in terms of what the outcome is going to be?
No, it's a big X factor. I mean, one of the big surprises in 2020 was how much the overall turnout in the general election in 2020, the Georgia election that featured Biden-Trump on the ballot, how close the turnout in the runoff for the 2 Senate seats actually came to the presidential level turnout. One thing that Democrats successfully did in that runoff campaign the last time around was they increased the African-American share of the vote. And meanwhile, there was a slight, but I think significant, this is the 2021 runoff that got Warnock elected in the first place, there was a slight but significant drop-off in Republican turnout in some of the core Republican areas of the state. That includes Northwest Georgia, the Marjorie Taylor Greene district in the state, areas where perhaps Trump and everything he was saying about Georgia and its election at that point might have depressed Republican turnout. So that was one of those features, I think, in the 2021 runoff. Democrats, I think, are encouraged in what they see in these early voting numbers in terms of potentially increasing African-American turnout again for the runoff this time. The question is, on the Republican side, again, it's only answerable once we see all the election day votes. You know, it's that Republican voter who went out there and voted for Brian Kemp for governor and gave Kemp a convincing victory. Does that voter show up tomorrow, vote tomorrow? And if so, does that voter vote for Herschel Walker in the Senate race? Because that's, if he's going to find a way to reverse what was essentially, he finished a point behind Warnock in the preliminary. If he's going to reverse that, those are the voters he needs to find.
There you go. Steve Kornacki, thank you. We will see you again tomorrow for the results and whatever happens. Both